Hello and welcome to Taking Liberties Radio, the final episode of 2017. Well, year of review. It's actually January 6 or whatever, or 8. But we're going to talk about the highlights and lowlights for all of us from last year. I'm joined by Vickers and Zeev.
Hey.
Hello.
And we're all going to share a highlight and a lowlight of the last year and talk about it. So, Vickers, how about you start? Why don't we do? We'll do the highlight. We'll do highlight and lowlight each person. So
yeah, sure.
What's your highlight for last year?
Yeah. So just to give people the context, though, this episode was meant to be recorded at the end of last year before we left. Yeah. But I guess we all got busy. But irrespective of that, the highlight for me is actually something that happened after this would have been recorded last year, actually. So while I was in Japan, the big thing that people were raving on about, and it happened just on Boxing Day, was that North Korea had actually started talks with South Korea. So for anyone who's not aware of this, I remember when I was there, they were saying it's been nigh on 20 years since the North Koreans had opened up this. Sorry, since North Koreans and South Koreans had this much discussion. Now, for me, I thought that's a pretty big thing.
Do we know what's on the agenda?
Largely the Olympic Games, which are being held in South Korea.
Okay.
Yeah. So I believe it's the Winter Olympic Games this year. Yeah. So I mean, it's interesting because like it's a hermit state, and some people have jumped on and said, "Hey, this is Donald Trump's doing," which in a way I can kind of see how it would be. If you think about it, the way Donald Trump has been saber rattling in the region, it's enough to make people nervous. And I suppose that could have let North Korea start discussions with the South, because it's probably better to talk with the South than it is to talk with America, who is technically still at war with the North Koreans.
Could be. Also, the Olympics, I guess, are a profound nationalistic moment, and for North Korea to maybe miss out on that as an opportunity to showcase itself, I don't know. Maybe that's
they boycotted the Olympic Games in Seoul. What was it, in 1988? I think. So it's not unheard of for them to boycott the Olympic Games in South Korea.
Okay.
I mean, my understanding is that the party which the current president of South Korea is a part of has traditionally sort of been quite open to the possibility of discussions with North Korea. Like they were the ones who brought about the Kaesong, I think it's how it's pronounced, the Kaesong Industrial Park, which is essentially a South Korean built, North Korean run industrial park, which is just kind of on the northern side of the border. And so like this particular part of these and I think his platform was to, have talks with the North Koreans. So, I mean, obviously with all the discussion around Trump and his belligerence on Twitter, it's easy to say, well, it's obviously because of Trump, but I suspect that this is the kind of thing that it probably would have happened independently of him, because the South Koreans are their own people, and also part of the President Moon coming in, he rejected the THAAD missile launcher, which is like an anti-missile thing, which was going to cost a couple of $1 billion. But that was, I think the nationalist side of politics in Korea wanted it, and the more sort of social democratic side didn't want that. So, maybe that sort of thing de-escalates it, and then opens the possibility of talks. So, I'm less likely to ascribe this as a win to Donald Trump. Also, just because there's nothing in his public comments to say that he was genuinely encouraging talks. He was just being belligerent on Twitter, which is, that's what Twitter is for. But yeah, I wouldn't say it as a font of diplomatic momentum.
It's not being ascribed to him as being he promoted it or anything like that. The line of thinking from analysts has been that people are genuinely afraid of what Donald Trump will do if they're in North Korea, and they consider discussions with South Korea, who they've not been wanting to talk to the several times this party has been in play, because they think that that's a more rational way to have a discussion than it is to deal with Donald Trump. So in a way, people are saying Donald Trump being crazy is what's promoted people to seek the most rational response.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, it's part of the issue is these things happen in secret quite often, and
These are really
even just the nature of what's being said.
Cloud, what can I say? I mentioned this maybe before the show a bit as well, but the idea that people have concluded that the US president is so crazy that they must talk to someone else instead. To my mind, that's a silver lining on a grey cloud. I'll say that much. I'm not quite sure it qualifies as the good news story of the year, but I can see how it does, but I can also see how it also doesn't.
Well,
if that makes sense.
Sorry, I just happened to be in Japan at the time, and it was regarded as a pretty fucking big deal there. Like, it was all over the news.
No doubt it is, and that's great, and I'm happy to hear it. But I'm also like, well, people have assumed that the leader of one of the most powerful countries in the world is a total spaz. Doesn't that make us pause for a moment? Okay.
Not really.
I was like, maybe more obviously a spaz is a better way. It's not exactly like US foreign policy has been like sane and reasonable for the last 20 years, but yeah. All right. What about your low light? Speaking of spazzes and low lights, what's your low light for the 2017? Because
oh god, there are so many to pick from, and I've totally forgotten which one I selected in the first place. Can anyone remind me? I can't remember. We had this discussion before.
I can't.
Oh no, yeah. You know what? I do remember. It was all the random. I swear to God, there have been more terrorist attacks in the last year.
Right.
Yeah, that's right. I just remembered Bollards of Freedom, and I went, yeah, it's a pretty sad state that we're getting into.
Is that in Australia? Are we saying in Australia, or are we saying globally?
Well, even in Australia, we've had.
Okay. I'll accept in Australia, but I don't know about globally. Like that was.
Yeah, well, globally, here's the thing. I think globally the axe might actually be down because you have to include the Middle East as well, and ISIS got defeated last year. Yeah. So it would globally it would technically be down, but in anywhere you could call a Western democracy, it's up, and it's quite sharply up. And in Australia, I think we had We had an incident where a guy drove through a bunch of people.
Is that the most recent?
That's happened twice in Melbourne.
That's the most recent one.
Oh, okay. But I don't know if the first one counts, really. I think the first one was just crazy dude, but the second one certainly seems to be at least somewhat terror motivated, yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't talking about the first one. The first one, my recollection was the guy was a bit mentally ill and just
on the run from the cops.
Yeah.
Or just a crim on the run from a cops on a massive adrenaline high.
Yeah. And if I recall,
balanced mind.
Yeah, and you know what? One thing I really wish we'd stop doing is apologizing for the acts of these people and attributing it in some way to group identity. Like the fact that every time one of these things comes up and someone says not all Muslims, I'm just like, but that's not the point. We're not talking about Muslims here. We're talking about people.
Well, the right is talking about Muslims as a whole. You know, Andrew Bolts and Piers Ackermans and all the rest of them of the world. They certainly see it as a collective guilt.
Well, they always use the word Islamist, which I've never taken to mean Muslim. In fact, they quite talk like when they talk about the specific group of people they're talking about radicalized Muslims. And you know what? Some of the points they raise are technically true. These I guess you could say fifth columns of terrorist activity do occur inside the mosques. They are being radicalized in madrasas that are here in Australia. They're being encouraged by particular types of Marxist professors. These
Can
are
I
all
pause
things
there for a moment and say, because you may be quite right about a general movement, but I don't know about whether the specific Afghan taxi driver we're dealing with in Melbourne last is a product of all that. I don't know if we have the information to say that yet. That's all.
No.
But it may well be just in the general sense radicalized over the internet.
Hang on. No, you're right. The Afghan driver may not have been. The student that shot the cop was.
Okay.
Yeah, so he did go to an Australian university. He was indoctrinated through the madrasas. right? And Mans Monas was wasn't indoctrinated, but he was brought up with that. He was introduced to people of that ideology at a mosque. So, I mean...
Well, he did come from Iran, where that ideology was also, quite... it was the regime ideology, really, in a way. But anyway.
Not particularly.
That may not have been the inspiration, but he certainly came from a background where it was,
Yeah.
I mean, it's certainly true that, Andrew Bolt will pick on him because he's the figurehead of the right. He would say, yes, not all Muslims are terrorists, but he would say that Islam as a whole is a violent religion.
I think that.
So in some ways, that's the mirror image of the left, which says all Muslims are safe, except for these few ones over here. So I think both are drawn to collective.
Collectivization. Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
sure.
Well, as I go so far to say that we shouldn't even distinguish between terrorism and murder. We should just say it's all murder, and like every other murderer, we just assume that they're an individual that are acting on their own, set of beliefs, and whatever those beliefs is irrelevant.
Sure,
they're just acting. They're just behaving in a way that is wrong, and we judge them as an individual.
Sure, but that just comes down to the point which I was trying to get to, which is that these things are happening, and that we're not really we're not dealing with it as a policing matter particularly well, right? And it's got to do with some of these elements which are like, hey, we can't touch them because they're Muslims, because not all Muslims. And I'm there going like, hang on, that's not what's going on here. I mean, this activity is occurring in the mosque, but other than the fact that it's occurring in a mosque, there is nothing different to it, right?
But I mean, I don't know if you can actually police these things in a particular way, because they're essentially a bunch of lone wolf attacks. Like it's not like ISIS is actually coordinating attacks in Australia. It's not like they've got their, bureaucracy somewhere or in a hidden camp somewhere out in the bush, and they're leading a guerrilla war against Australia. It's essentially a bunch of individuals who are deciding to act out their beliefs, whether they're of their right mind or not. I think it's irrelevant.
Sure, but
essentially it's a bunch of people who have individuals who are acting individually for the same aim, and so I think that's always going to be difficult to police, because you're not going to have this coordinated structure you can take down. It's not like it's not like the bikies or whatever, where you've got a coordinated supply lines of heroin coming from wherever.
Look,
there's just got people who get mad and drive their car into a crowd.
There were some meetings, I think, and there was going to be a public event of, but I think it was cancelled, of Islamist radicals in Melbourne. So look, I'm not saying that it is to some extent an ideology that is trying to convert members here, and that has open public adherence, like your Hizb ut-Tahrir or what have you. So that's definitely an issue. Whether it's a police issue, I don't know about that. Until it becomes an issue where they're literally sitting down and planning attacks. At that point, it's definitely a police issue. Before that,
sure, yeah, absolutely. If there actually was a conspiracy, the police should investigate it. But as to the best of my knowledge, of anybody's knowledge, and I don't think it will be disputed, there is no coordinated, strategy here. It's essentially just particular individuals acting individually.
Okay,
let's set that aside. They are doing that already. They're doing it with community intelligence. They may be doing it by surveillance. I have no doubt about it, because they've had many the dawn raids played up for the cameras already. So, I mean, I've no doubt that it already happened.
Yep. So here's the thing. By the time you're getting to the dawn raids, it's actually, in my mind, that's getting a bit late. So one of the most successful policies we've had in terms of reducing, I guess you could say, crime in mostly middle-class suburbs. And people forget it's actually very recent that crime in middle-class suburbs really came down to the point where it's not a thing that people see. And that really successful program was the See Something, Say Something sort of campaigns. And these campaigns aren't really being run or encouraged in these spaces. And they're not, because it's seen as a culturally sensitive issue. Like, hey, you're treating them like they're some other group. And I'm just like, well, I'm not saying they're another group, but they clearly have a better idea about what's going on in there, who's talking about what, and really kind of trying to get them to, I guess you could say, start rooting out the anti-Australian sort of rhetoric within their own community.
I think there's, to some extent, that's already been done, although to some extent it's an issue that they're going to find difficult to deal with because, I mean, a lot of these community mosques or madrasas, I mean, their ownership structures are geared towards the leadership being in charge. And that shouldn't be surprising because it's the same in practically every organized religion. The you know, whether it be the Jewish or Catholic or what have you, even if the head honchos aren't directly owning the place, they are certainly entrenched contractually or, you know, by means of the organization somehow, and it's very difficult to remove them, and they run the thing. So, it's problematic to deal with it in that way. I would not, other than to just plain leave, which I'm sure some have already done. But
I'm just going to jump in at this point and say maybe we move on to the next topic. Otherwise, we could probably talk about this for another hour.
Probably.
So, Steve, how about you? After all this talk of terrorism, let's have a good news moment.
Oh, okay, a good news moment. Global poverty is down by any metric worth measuring. The fact of the matter is that we live in a world where extreme poverty, defined as basically living on about $1.50 US a day or less, basically all by metrics of having access to clean water, safe food to eat, sanitation. All of these metrics indicate that people are just getting healthier and wealthier by the day. That's not to say that, you know, specific people in specific countries are getting healthier and wealthier by the day, but the global mass of humanity is getting that way. And I think there's a good article on this by Nicholas Kristof in the New York Times. He's their resident relative right-winger, so to speak, I think. And I think the points he makes are really quite well put. That since 1990, the lives of more than 100 million children have been saved by vaccinations. Fewer than 15% of people worldwide are nowadays illiterate. Fewer than 10% live in extreme poverty. In another 15 years, it's predicted that illiteracy and extreme poverty will be mostly gone. Now, if you think about that, of course, I mean, if you cast your eye back perhaps 100 or 200 years, illiteracy would have been prevalent, and the if not the vast majority, then certainly, at a rough guess, 70-80% of the entire world would have been illiterate, and people living in extreme poverty would probably have been the norm outside of a few Western countries. So we really are getting much, much better off, and it's worth celebrating. So crack open a bottle of champagne for free markets because they're doing their job. Well, that might have been a slight tie in there that you might say, well, where's the proof of that, Zev? And, well, you can look at the places where free markets and secure property rights are not as strong, and you can say those are actually some of the poorest countries in the world taking the longest time to develop. And you can also say the places that have turned back away from the free market system, like Venezuela and North Korea, are the only places on earth really nowadays, apart from war-torn countries, where poverty is rife. Extreme poverty is developing and increasing in Venezuela, and people are starving in the streets and eating zoo animals and all of that. So, yes, free markets work. Things are getting better, and by and large, we're all doing well. So give ourselves a pat on the back.
It's interesting you bring up North Korea because I've listened to a number of podcasts recently that talked about North Korea and essentially sort of quasi-black market, quasi-legit market, like actual market activity. So after the famines in North Korea, they essentially did what the Chinese did after the sort of the Cultural Revolution, where there were these farms that developed that were essentially privately run, and it became a sort of an open secret in that region, and then eventually became the policy of all of China to allow for private farming. And there was a similar sort of thing where you had all this sort of trade and all this private farming kind of going on in North Korea, and it was sort of just overlooked, and then it sort of kind of became the policy to sort of just let it, as long as it doesn't get too, capitalist, but there's still somewhat of an opening up. And obviously, I mean, as a nation, they haven't opened up, but I mean, even
in a relative opening up.
Yeah, a relative thing. So,
and sometimes I'm sad to say, sometimes it's just cyclically. Sometimes it's just they open up for a bit and they close down for a bit, and it just keeps going like that. It could be a harbinger of a greater opening up. We don't know.
Well, yeah, and that's actually what did happen, I think. So I think after sort of around the end of Kim Jong-il's time, it sort of closed down. It was closed down. And then recently Kim Jong-un has sort of opened it up again. So, it's a little bit of progress. It's obviously they've got a long way to go, but, and the other thing I'd say is humanprogress.org is a really good website. They've got a summary of the year's good news of all sorts of crazy things going on where it's human flourishing, which is great.
And there's Our World in Data, which is the website which has the data on this reduction in global poverty, which Nicholas Kristof discusses in his article, which was why 2017 was the best year in human history on the New York Times. So worth a read to lift your spirits. Anyway.
Well, let's have a downing of the spirits. So how about your low light for the year?
Oh, the low light was North Korea and Venezuela being in dire straits. I've gone through it enough, and I don't want to go through it anymore, frankly, other than to note that I think I briefly did note that people in North Korea are still in dire straits. People in Venezuela are getting worse by the day, unfortunately, in terms of facing extreme starvation and the like. So, that would be my bad news story.
And unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be much progress. Particularly, Venezuela seems to be very much on the same track, which is pretty awful.
And they're not pulling themselves out of it, which is the worst part. Sometimes these regimes, come back from the brink and allow more commerce and trade and so on, but it's not happening here, and nor is the regime collapsing, which is, it's unfortunate, but it looks like it's just going to continue the way it is for who knows how long more.
Indeed, yes. It's just going to have to play out, and yeah. Well, I've got some good news from the last year, which is that Aaron Stonehouse was the first Libertarian parliamentarian in WA was elected. It's obviously just, one upper house MP is not a revolution make, but it's still very good news, I think, for the ideas of liberty. I think he's an interesting guy. So he's 26. He worked in a call center prior to being elected. So, he's not coming out of the sort of the rarefied air of politics. But yeah, so far I've been pretty happy with the way he's got about things. So even, talking about, most recently he had a discussion in the upper house where he talked about Portugal's success in decriminalisation of drugs. And there were people who'd never even heard of that. They couldn't believe that actually happened. And it seemed like they were eager to sort of hear more. So, it's
There's been
small
talk
steps.
of an inquiry or a study tour or something. And that's what he put up on his Facebook page.
Yeah, what's funny is I've brought that up even here. And nobody, there were politicians, literally, when I brought it up here,
in Sydney,
in Canberra, you mean?
In Canberra, yeah.
In Canberra.
Liberal MPs have literally been like, "What? No, that's never happened." And I'm just like, "Are you fucking serious?" I'm like, I'll bring up the actual thing on my phone, and they just go like, "No, that's just people just write whatever they want on the internet. They don't believe it actually happened."
No. Well, and I think Aaron's pretty keen to.
Well, they don't want to listen to
about
things that are against their political viewpoint, because Brian Kaplan, who is an interesting economist, has done this little story about how polling, or rather survey data, indicates that politicians tend to dismiss evidence against them and accept evidence in favour of them. So it's kind of like that wishful thinking playing out. Anyway, go on, Lee.
Well, I mean, also, it's like politicians are not policy experts. Like, the skills you need to get into Parliament are generally not the ones that necessarily mean you're going to be up to date with all sorts of policy issues, especially issues that in kind of the public consciousness are sort of settled. You know, it's not like, there's a lot of, protests in the street about the drug war. So, it's very easy for them to be complacent. But hopefully that will change. I mean, so we've seen recreational weed being legalized in California and Nevada. Later on, it'll be Massachusetts this year. And Aaron's brought that up already. So hopefully we'll be seeing more discussion. And you never know. I mean, medical marijuana, basically, I think most states and federally have either in principle agreed or actually pushed through legislation to make it some sort of reality. Obviously, it's not the kind of market we'd like to see, but at least it's somewhat happening. So sometimes these changes can happen very, very quickly without us realizing it, and that's always good. So I think that's a win for libertarians when those things happen. And so it's a little bit of good news, I find, and so that's my good news. The bad news is, in my view, is just the unending nature of the culture war. So I found this year that. Oh gosh, so much. I mean, I think Trump in particular obviously stirs this up because the cultural war is what he lives for, and that sort of reflects itself in kind of libertarian culture and thinking and discussion. But oh my goodness, I can't wait for I mean, not that the culture wars are ever over, but I just look forward to the day where maybe they might tamp down a bit, because it's a little bit ridiculous. Just the vitriol and the hatred and also just the focus on things that don't matter. So being mad that people do things differently when you can just, ignore them and go on with your life and be happy and not worry about it.
Yeah,
I think that's the worst thing, is that it essentially drives people to be very preoccupied with how other people are going about their lives.
I don't know, dude. I'd have to say 2017 was probably the quietest year in terms of the culture war. I mean, I didn't even see a single war on Christmas thing. And not just that.
Well, apart from the whole Greens thing. So the Greens did that stunt.
Yeah, but that was the Greens trolling people. And I'm sitting there going like, okay, so they asked for it. Nobody was talking about it until they put it up. Right? And then it was over within like 2 days, which is significantly shorter. I mean, the only thing in my mind the only thing that I've noticed that's changed is the left are losing the culture war. In the sense that everybody seems to have taken a step back and gone, what the fuck are you guys talking about? Like they've lost on key points regarding trans. I mean, there's people openly saying, you guys have no idea what the fuck you're talking about. Please shut the fuck up until you get an idea. Then on top of that, you've got like actual opposition to key things that they're pushing, and which don't even. Sorry, like take for example the Safe School stuff. The Safe Schools program now actually they've gotten rid of a lot of sections of the Safe School stuff which nobody could actually identify the purpose of, and now it's actually a program that sits in line with what people would expect in terms of what you're teaching kids from grades 8 upwards. So I mean, like it's a bona fide anti-bullying program.
Does that mean the Andrew Bolts of the world all of a sudden going to be fans of Safe School? Like if you went into the conservative comments section of whatever, you go to the comment section of the Australian or the Herald Sun or whatever and say, "Oh, Safe Schools is a really great program," people are going to freak out. People are going to call you the crazed leftist.
Oh, sorry, sorry. So you're saying I didn't realize that your measure of what like a year in a year with respect to, I guess, because culture wars is based entirely on comment sections, because I would have based it on what the common parlance is, and I'd have to say the culture wars stuff has been really quiet last year, for me at least, and I spend most of my time on the internet, so...
How do we measure this?
I do too.
Can I just be a little skeptical? How do we measure what the culture wars is? how much has there been more or less? I'm just saying nobody really knows.
Yeah. So the thing is, my idea of measuring it would be not the level of outrage that's generated, but the length of time that it goes for. Because you can stick outrage in for a 24-hour news cycle quite easily. It doesn't take a lot. In fact, what's her name? The human meme.
Oh, Yasmin, whatever her
Yeah,
name
that's
is.
it. Yeah, so the human meme, as I call her, she's inserted herself for like a 24-hour news cycle by saying, "Oh, Australians haven't realised that they are all, criminals." And I went like, "Oh yeah, congratulations. That's not attention seeking at all." So like, my general sort of thing is, if the outrage lasts for more than 2 days, then it's a bona fide, culture war, like actual skirmish. And
what about Milo? Not the tin, but the person.
The Milo, yeah. So
no one may ever speak badly of Milo the Tin stuff, because that tin stuff is amazing.
What's tin?
I would never
What's Milo
allow people to
talking
lovely, delicious, chocolatey goodness.
A new culture war right here with Leah, and that would be dangerous.
Milo means that it's just nothing but the chocolate drink.
Oh my god! Can we please do that? Because that is amazing stuff. But
that's one hill in the culture war that Lee will die on. Anyway, go on.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So the Milo appearance, ironically, so I actually wanted to do an episode on the Milo appearance because I've always wanted to be able to say this. The LDP got cucked by Milo.
I agree.
So think about it. This was hilarious. So for anyone who doesn't understand what this means, I'll explain it to you. So David Lionhelm invited Milo Yiannopoulos to come to Parliament House and give his whole speech, and be, for the purpose of saying we support free speech. Yeah. Now, during that time, Milo, I think he managed to raise $150,000 on that visit, and guess which party that went to? I'll give you a hint. It's not the LDP.
Australian Conservatives?
No, it went to Pauline Hanson One Nation. So, not only did David Lionhelm take all of the hit and all of the damage for inviting Milo, so he's associated as being the douchebag that invited Milo. But here's the thing: everyone who likes Milo was told to donate to Pauline Hanson One Nation Party. So to those
who told them? I just want this confirmation.
Milo told them.
Wow.
Milo told them. So for anyone who's in the LDP, congratulations, you are all cuckolds. You've literally been cuckolded by Milo Yiannopoulos.
What's the evidence for this?
So hang on. I'm happy to get the linking for it, but Milo personally to Pauline Hanson. There's a whole bunch of stories, but
where's the 150K story? Because I don't think this is known at all, and it ought to be known.
So the 150K was his personal message on his thing that his donors had all managed
to. That's what he reckons.
Yeah, that's what he reckons.
Okay,
I don't know if it's actually. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
but he's certainly called for people to donate to One Nation.
Correct, he has,
Wow.
And not just that. So there was a shoe that was thrown at him. He generated $2,100 from that, and he gave it as a donation to One Nation.
Okay. Can we have...
It's almost like...
Please.
Yeah. So here's the Herald... Oh, yeah, yes. So there's a Herald Sun article. It's
After
called
the show, you can put them up.
Yeah. Yep, sure. So
it's almost like the alt-right really isn't the friend of libertarianism. It's always hard to imagine that nobody has said this, ever.
Yeah, so, yeah... No, but I brought it up on the ALF several times, and people were just like, what? And I linked them this story, and it's just like, I don't think you... And, you can go to his personal page. He said Pauline Hanson was like... He was really friendly with Pauline Hanson. There's also photos of him with Mark Latham, so people have gone like, okay, so Mark Latham's LDP, right? So technically he's also...
He's a member, though. He's not a senator, and that's he's a member of the party. He's not a senator.
Yeah, precisely. I mean, although they probably will put him up.
Pretty high-profile member, though.
I'm almost certain that the LDP will put him at the top rank.
They could.
Yeah, pretty much because even David's already said that he's probably going to be putting.
They don't have anyone else. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
If they do, I don't know if I'll stay. But anyway, go on.
Yeah, but like I said, this is pretty much what I would say is cucked.
Interesting.
Yep. I'd say that's a fair assessment.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I mean, is there anything else, any other further reflections of 2017 you want to make before we
No, I just want to
wrap
say
things up?
cucked once more. The LDP
Okay.
cucked. Cucked.
Thank you, Vickers. That was adorable.
Highly intellectual conversation going on here. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening to this episode of Taking Liberty, the final one for 2017, theoretically. And we'll be doing a brand new season for 2018.
Wait. I need to make one quick. No. I've blown out the number. It's not 150K. It's just $1,500.
So, still
$1,500.
That's
Look,
I mean, for a small party, that's a lot of money. Like if you gave a $1,500 donation to LDP, they would pay attention to you.
Can I note here? Clinton from the Liberal Democrats says that, and this is on Facebook, on the group, the Liberal Democrats group, he said that there were a few $1,000s worth of financial member sign-ups as a result of Milo's presence in Australia. So let the truth be noted. Yeah.
Fair enough.
There you go. It happened.
Yeah, sorry. I went and looked for that article, and I'm just like,
It definitely deserves notice and attention. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
We'll just leave it at that. Thanks very much, everybody.
I know.